Okuma Small Auditorium is the name of this hall. I'd like to start the plenary lecture. It's an honor for me to introduce Matsuoka Kazuko sensei. Sorry, I usually call her sensei, but actually she should be Mrs. Kazuko Matsuoka. Then I'd like to introduce her briefly. Matsuoka sensei is the preeminent translator of Shakespeare in Japan, and above all, the first woman and the third person in Japan to achieve a complete translation of Shakespeare last year. The first Japanese person to translate the complete works of Shakespeare was Dr. Shoyo Tsubouchi of Waseda University in 1928. Considering that, Matsuoka sensei is the third person to do so nearly 100 years later. It is evident how difficult it is to translate Shakespeare's work completely. Matsuoka sensei graduated from Tokyo Women's University and completed a master's degree at the University of Tokyo, and worked at Tokyo Medical and Dental University for probably 15 years before retiring, and is a professor emeritus now. She is a member of the International Association of Theatre Critics and a member of the planning committee for the Sai no Kuni Shakespeare theatres at the Saitama Arts Theatre. It was the theatre of Minagawa's direction was theatre. She was awarded most of the prestigious prizes for her complete translations of Shakespeare, including 58 Japan Translation Culture Awards, and 6 Kikuchi-kan Prize, Asahi Prize, and Tsubouchi Shoyo's Grand Prize from Waseda University. Matsuoka sensei's Shakespeare-related books include Shakespeare in All Seasons, Shakespeare Narrative of Book Commodities, Shakespeare in Depth Reading, and Reading Shakespeare Pleasantry. But please note that these titles of the books may not be accurate because I translated them from the Japanese book title. She has also translated a number of foreign plays, including Thomas Tupper's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, Ronald Howard's The Dresser, Carrie Church's Cloud Nine, and Tennessee Williams, Douglas Maynard's, and so on. And then I'm delighted to welcome Matsuoka sensei. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for larger than life-size introduction of me. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming and listen to my experience as a Shakespeare translator. It took 28 years for me to translate all the Shakespeare's 37 plays. The first one was Comedy of Errors in 1993, and the last one was All's Well That Ends Well, the very suitable title of the play to commemorate my long journey. During the 28 years, thanks to the process and procedure of translation, I had many realizations, notices, and discoveries about Shakespeare's plays, his languages, and also the act of translation itself. It goes without saying that the process of translation consists of 2 stages. The one is to read, analyze, and understand the original text. And the second one is to express what you have grasped of the original text in your own mother tongue, in my case, in Japanese. First, I'd like to talk about one of my realizations about the first stage of translation. As I remember, it was after I translated Timon of Athens that I came about it. The realization is that the reading of original text by a translator, or the translator's way of reading of the original text, is fair and egalitarian and impartial. Very fair and egalitarian, not only to the text itself, but also to every single character of the play you are translating. Not only to the text and characters, but also to every single speech and lines. However hateful or small the character may be, however famous and great the lines may be, or on the contrary, however casual utterances the lines may have, the translator reads them, taking the same distance, or I should say, taking the same closeness to them. I hope every translator of any language will agree with me. Actually, I have taken that attitude long before translating Timon of Athens. As Professor Fuyuki introduced me, I started translating British and American plays in the early years of 80s. Among them are Harriet Churchill's Cloud Nine, Tom Stopper's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, and Ronald Howard's The Dresser. Looking back in those days, I already did the impartial way of reading the text, but I was not conscious of the stance. Until translating Timon of Athens, I didn't realize the attitude or stance. More correctly speaking, I couldn't or I didn't verbalize the attitude. Then why translating Timon of Athens? Almost all the characters of the play, including the title role, fail to make us feel sympathetic. They even seem to refuse our sympathy or compassion. So many unpleasant characters appear one after another. When I finished translating the play, I thought that in spite of their unpleasant characteristics, I had taken the same closeness to every one of them and had tried to express what they wanted to say in Japanese. Then I could verbalize the attitude as the translator's way of reading, which is very fair and egalitarian and impartial. Probably simply because of the way of the close reading. In other words, owing to the translator's impartial way of reading. I could notice, for instance, Falstaff's if in first part of Henry IV, and high frequency of the sentence pattern no, and no followed by a person or persons as the object of the verb in King Lear. And the fact that in Titus Andronicus, so many characters give order or command in combination with calling the other character's name. Would you please take a look at the handout? In King Lear, Act 1, Scene 1, Gloucester says to Edmund, yeah, handout.
Oh, I'm sorry, handouts are coming soon. Please wait a little bit.
As I quoted here in the handout, Shakespeare uses the verb know, followed by a personal person as the object of the verb, such as know thee, know this gentleman, much more often than any other play. For instance, in Act 1, Scene 1, Gloucester asks to Edmund in front of the do you know this gentleman? And Act 1, Scene 4, does any here know me? This is not ear. Does ear walk thus? And Act 4, Scene 6, I know thee well enough. Thy name is Gloucester. That meeting is at the Dover. In the play, that pattern, I mean, know, followed by a person or persons, appear 21 times. For comparison, in Hamlet, that pattern appears 10 times. In Macbeth, 5 times. In Othello, 9 times, according to the Bartlett's Shakespeare recorders. So, purely in terms of frequency of that vocabulary, no, and the sentence pattern, King Lear could be said a play to know people, or that it is a tragedy born from not knowing the people. And Titus Andronicus, Saturninus said, Romans, do me right. Patricians, draw your swords. Act 2, Scene 2, Titus. Come, Lucius, come, stay not to talk with him. Act 3, Scene 1, Titus. Speak, Lavinia, what accursed hand hath made thee handless? So this pattern closely connected with the main theme, or actions of the play, I think. And King Henry IV, Act 2, Scene 2, Falstaff's speech. If I travel but 4 foot by the square further off foot, I shall break my wing. And if I escape hanging for killing the rogue, I have forsworn his company hourly any time this 220 years. As I quoted, he uses if so many times. And probably you may remember Touchstone's speech in As You Like It in Act 4, Scene 4. I knew when 7 judges could not take up quarrel, But when the parties were met themselves, one of them thought, but of an if. If you said so, then I said so. And they shook hands and swore brothers. Your if is the only peacemaker. Much virtue in if. So, if is a convenient means of escaping or retreating from the predicament for Falstaff. Falstaff's if is a beautiful example of what Touchstone mentions in, I think, in As You Like It. So, I think that discoveries or notices is brought from the close reading of translators' close reading, taking the same closeness, the same distance to every single phrases or sentences or character as a whole text, I think. Shakespeare's, about the first stage of translation, let me talk about one more thing, that is handwriting. I handwrote not merely the rough draft of Japanese translation, but Shakespeare's original lines. I clearly remember when I started that. My 19th translation of Shakespeare was The Winter's Tale. In Act 1, Scene 2, Leontes, the king of Sicilia, gets suddenly possessed with jealousy. He suspects adultery of his wife, Hermione, and his close friend, Polixenes, the Bohemian king. The lines in his soliloquy, starting with affection, thy intention stabs the center, was so difficult, so hard to understand, even though I looked up into every footnote and every longer notes at the end of the books of 10 different modern texts of the play. And finally, along with the research, as a desperate effort, I scribbled the lines on the back of the waste paper. That was the beginning. That was the trick. Since then, from The Winter's Tale to All's Well That Ends Well, whenever I came up with a difficult lines, I handwrote them on the waste papers over and over again. Perhaps more often than Shakespeare himself. First, I copied the original lines as were printed on the text. Then, if there was an inversion of the words or phrases, for instance, for the sake of the iambic pentameter, I wrote the lines again in the usual word order. If I found a long modifying phrase, I wrote the line again, taking out the phrase. In the end, so to speak, a bone frame of the lines is in front of me. Shakespeare wrote his plays by hand himself, with a quill and ink. His ideas and thoughts, born in his brain, ran to his hand through his arms. Then he fixed them on the paper by writing them down. I don't know whether he was left-handed or right-handed, but I wrote it down by right hand. It may sound suspicious to you, but I imagined that by writing his lines, with my own hand, I could trace back the stream of thought, literally to the head. Anyway, it worked for me. I believe handwriting his speeches had an effect like a good luck charm, and I could appreciate Shakespeare's lines much more than just by reading them. I recommend you to write down Shakespeare's lines by hand. Now let me talk about the second stage of translation, to express what I have grasped of the original text in Japanese. The majority of Shakespeare's lines are composed with 3 levels or layers or strands. The semantic one, the metaphorical 2, and the metrical 3. If one were to pick out each of these strands like threads, then the 3 threads, when twisted together, would form a single phrase or sentence. If one were to pick out each of those strands like threads, then, the meaning is often multi-layered or multi-stranded, with the image it contains acting in counterpoint. Then there is the prosody, the accentual rhythms, a blend of long and short vowels, the end rhymes and alliterations, the puns, and so on. To analyze a given phrase or sentence is to, so to speak, loosen the thread or pair the trinities layer by layer. If I try, if I can, or to translate those 3 threads of the original, those 3 threads into living Japanese without hurting them, but making the same trinities in Japanese is the hardest thing of all, almost impossible. In translation, I have no choice but to favor one or other elements of the 3, depend on the context. It is usually the semantic thread, which is the indispensable one. But when the source is all wordplay, meaning takes second place, and I am looking for images and for something which sounds good. But to choose and what to give up of the Trinity vary from translator to translator. That's why there are so many Japanese Hamlet, for instance. And I found that translation of Shakespeare's play is a mirror up to the transition or changes of Japanese language and society and the view of male-female relationships. Since Tsubo Uchi-shoyo, more than 100 years have passed. So the translation of Shakespeare can be said a fixed point observation of the transition in 100 years. I'd like to take, for instance, Romeo and Juliet. It seems to me that previous translations have tended to make Juliet's language too polite, the fair maiden of gentle birth, and too feminine. Perhaps it's because they were done by men. Previous translations of the famous balcony scene have made Juliet sound extremely modest, even condescending. towards Romeo. And this is probably because, I think, reflection of the male translator's concealed desire to make her perceived modest and condescending. In a famous balcony scene, Romeo and Juliet talk to each other on the equal standpoint, equal footing, using the intimate thou as second personal pronoun singular. However, for a long time, preceding translators ignored thou. Translation of calling each other's name seems symbolic to me. Original Juliet calls Romeo just Romeo. But for a long time, Japanese-speaking Juliet used an honorific title to Romeo, Romeo-sama or Romeo-san, that is, Sir Romeo or Mr. Romeo. However, both original Romeo and Japanese-speaking Romeo calls Juliet just Juliet, without any honorific title. Professor Odashima was the first translator of Romeo and Juliet that took the honorific title away from Romeo in Juliet's calling his name. That was in 1965, though Professor Oyama Toshiko's Juliet in 1966, and Professor Hirai Masao's Juliet in 1973 still called her beloved Romeo-sama. When I first got an offer to translate my first translation of Shakespeare, The Comedy of Errors, I decided that what I had to do as a woman translator was to remedy such imbalance found in the Japanese translation of Shakespeare. To translate Shakespeare as he wrote as much as possible. Now, I'd like to tell you about prosodic approach to the translation of a sequence, making much of the metrical factor in the lines, which is rather exceptional for me. As I told you, the semantic level or strength is indispensable, and prosodic approach is rather not often happens. But the sequence is in Act 4, Scene 1 of Richard II. A very impressive linguistic battle between Bolingbroke and Richard in the deposition scene. Bolingbroke says, "Are you consented to resign the crown?" In Richard, "I know, no I, for I must nothing be. Therefore, no, no, for I resign to thee. Now, mark me, how I will undo myself. I give this heavy weight from off my head, and this unwieldy scepter from my hand, the pride of kingly sway from out my heart." Before I actually started to translate the scene, I had thought the gist of the conversation was "I know, no I." Very short, very precise, and to the point. Affirmative, negative, negative, affirmative. And before I actually started to translate the scene, I had decided to create the equivalent impact by translating it in 8 syllables in Japanese too. But I thought yes and no in Japanese, for example, hai, so desu, or iie, ya chigau, didn't fit. They are not as precise and crisp as the original. I know, no, I. 4 times repetition of 2-syllable word. Again, would you please take a look at what I quoted from the scene in handout, page 2. Book, are you consented to resign the crown? I translated, 王冠譲渡にご依存は, if I back translate my translation, have you got any objection to resigning the crown? Richard says, I know, no, I, for I must nothing be. ない、ある、ある、ない。私は何者でもないものになるしかないのだから。If I back translate it, I have no objection, I have objection, no objection, for I must be nobody. Therefore, no, no, for I resign to thee. 従って依存があるはない。そなたに譲るのだから。Therefore, no having objection, for I resign to thee. Now mark me how I will undo myself. I give this heavy weight off my hand, of my head, and this unwieldy scepter from my hand. The pride of kingly sway from out my heart. さあよく見て。Now mark me. どんなふうに私が私を私でないものにするか。このずっしりとした重荷を私の頭から。この扱いにくい王爵を私の手から。王として君臨した誇りも私の心から取り去って。I know, no I is affirmative, negative, negative, affirmative. But ない、ある、ある、ない is negative, affirmative, affirmative, negative. So on the surface, they are the opposite. I mean the Shakespeare's original and my translation is on the surface, the opposite. But the meaning of both of them is I agree, not agree. Not agree, agree. Therefore, semantically, they are the same, I think, or I hope. Here, I'd like you to see the DVD clip of this scene, which are the second, directed by Mr. Ninagawa.
さあ、いとこ、王冠をつかめ。こちら側は私の手で、そちら側は君の手で。この黄金の冠は深い井戸のように2つの桶が変わる代わりに強みです。空になった方はいつも空中を跳ね上がり、もう一方はそこに沈んで人目に触れず水でいっぱいだ。そこに沈むと涙でいっぱいの桶は私だ。一方のあなたは高々と濁って喜んで上位なさるものと私の王冠は喜んでいる。だが悲しみはまだ私のものだ。私の栄光や王位は奪い取れるだろう。だが私の悲しみは別だ。私はまだ王にいる。悲しみ、気苦労のうちに
王冠とともに私に譲られます。
あなたの気苦労が始まっても私の気苦労は終わらない。私の気苦労は古い苦労が終わり、苦労をなくしたこと。あなたの気苦労は新たな苦労が始まり、苦労を得ること。私の譲る気苦労は譲ってもまだ手元に。苦労は王冠につきものなのに、まだ私のところに
王冠状態、これです
ない。ある。ない。私は何者でもないものになるしかないのだから、従って依存があるわけに、そなたに譲るのだ。よく見ていろ。どんなふうに私が私を私でないものにするか。このずっしりとした重荷を私の頭だ。この扱いにくい王爵を私の手からこうして譲る。王として君臨した時の誇りもこの心から取り去って、我と我が涙で私の王の聖誉を洗い落とす。我と我が手で私の王冠を譲り渡す。我と我が舌で私の神聖な王権を否認する。我と我が息で王への真珠の誓いすべてを解き放つ。神が私への誓いを破ったものをお許しになりますよう。神がそなたへの誓いすべてが破られるままになさいますよう。何一つ持たぬ私の嘆きの種が何一つ残りませるよう。すべてを勝ち得たそなたがすべてに満ち足りますよう。そなたがリチャードの座に収まり長生きしますよ。そしてリチャードが間もなく土の中に横たわりますよ。神よ、王ヘンリーを守りたまえと、もはや王ではないリチャードがさんさんと日の差す幾多の歳月を王に送りたまえ。
And I'd like you to see the mirror breaking scene.
おべっか使いの鏡で、私が映画を極めていた頃のシーカたちと同じだ。お前は私を騙している。これが毎日宮殿の屋根の下に1万もの人間を抱えていた顔か。これが太陽のように仰ぎ見るものをまぶしがらせた顔か。これが数々の愚行の顔とで、しまいにはボーリングブルックによって感触を失わされる顔か。この顔に輝くのは脆い栄光。この顔の栄光のように脆い。
Thank you very much. I thank Mr. Ninagawa because without him, without his offer for me to translate 37 plays for him, I shouldn't have been here like this. I couldn't have been here like this. So I'd like to thank Ninagawa-san very much. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for the fascinating lecture. And I was so impressed by her laborious process of translating work. And yes, we still have 10 minutes for question and answer session. If there's someone who wants to ask her, please raise your hand.
Thank you. First, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. I can't imagine. I just want to know how, from the beginning to this last one that ends well, how was it like? Did you go back again to do some kind of like to update? Did you think that maybe at some point what you have done needed to be upgraded? What did you feel like it was okay?
Yes, for instance, right now, Henry VIII is on stage, and the first performance was in 2019, but because of the corona, it stopped and cancelled. And so this year it was reproduced. And I attend rehearsals as much as possible. And I noticed that the first, I changed some interpretations or some expression, Japanese expression. So every time I have a chance, I read my own translation again. And luckily, every production consists of different actors and directors. So their questions differ from production to production. And I cope with a fresh program or fresh questions. So every time I'm asked about that, I think, and sometimes I change. So that happens a lot.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who has questions?
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It's a pleasure to see you here today. My colleague and friend, Rosalind Fielding, first introduced me to your work. And
She helped me a lot.
Yeah, I know that she is very in awe of you, and she inspired me to read something about the work that you've done, about your processes. And I wonder if it's not impertinent, if I could ask you a little bit more about that writing process that you talked about.
Writing
original lines.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering whether it's you view it more as a cognitive process of slowing down your reading, whether it just makes you take your time and pace yourself, or whether you see it something more, I don't want to misuse the term spiritual, but something more like Shakespeare, like clearing your mind, copying out the sutra, preparing yourself. I don't want to make an inappropriate analogy, but I would love to know what you think.
Probably it's similar to Shakespeare. But anyway, as I am a foreigner, it's quite easy for me to misinterpret the original line. But if I write them down, I can probably it will be safe for me to read and write.
Thank you so much. It's very wonderful to hear more of that.
Thank you very much. If there's anyone, please feel free to ask her.
So, thank you so much. How incredibly exciting. This must be the nearest I've ever been to meeting Shakespeare. So, I wanted to ask, from your position of being Shakespeare, are there any lines that
and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable recorded time. I translated that play in anyway, rather early part of my Shakespeare translation experience. But that line followed me ever. And I always think whether it's right or not. First, I translate that asumo, asumo, mata asumo. Asu means tomorrow. And that word, there is two ways of reading that. Ashita and asu. And asumo, asumo, mata asumo. I preferred at first because it's very rhythmical. But when I saw Macbeth directed by Gregory Doran and title role was played by Tony Sher, I noticed that it's not good to translate in a rhythmic way because tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, the accent is on and. It's quite unusual. And so the step of Macbeth is not asumo, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. So I changed it first, asu to ashita. But I wasn't contented with that because tomorrow means tomorrow, ashita, but also tomorrow, to the morning. So how I can express that to the morning, to the tomorrow morning more correctly. So just recently I changed it, ashita e, mata ashita e, mata ashita e. So only one line translation change it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. We have a few minutes left, but
This journey never ends.
Thank you for the lecture. I was shocked to hear that even you, it's very easy for even you to misunderstand Shakespeare's lines. And that's sort of kind of dilemma for some readers of Shakespeare, particularly foreign readers. And they want to read Shakespeare in the original text in English. They may have misunderstood, and they got confused so much. And one way is to read Shakespeare in translation, written by you, of course. But what about any tip, if you can give, like a tip for yeah. What kind of tip would you give to readers of Shakespeare if they want to read Shakespeare in the original text? I ask you this question because I'm a kind of lecturer who teach Shakespeare to students. So in that case,
I also had an experience of teaching. And I used Shakespeare as a textbook in my selective class. And but in my case, I taught at the medical and dental university, and so they are not specialized in literature. Shakespeare. but I want them to appreciate Shakespeare in original form. So I took up certain lines, very famous scenes, and first they read the translation, and then original one. So line by line, I hope, I believe they enjoyed the original Shakespeare in that way. I hope.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It seemed to time's up, so unfortunately, but I'd like to conclude the plenary lecture of Matsuoka Kazuko Sensei. Thank you very much indeed for your excellent